Nothing less than that. Right. They have managed to take our society and they've taken our society and they have unfortunately brought it to a point where this kind of violence against each other, this kind of communalization of identity, this kind of mistrust of people merely because of who they are rather than what they say or do or how they behave, all of these things have become dominant features. And what is more, that their bigotry and intolerance, they have the temerity to sort of drape it in the tricolor. That somehow our great flag, which by the way, the RSS had denounced till about 15 years ago, that flag has now become a fig leaf to cover the worst depravity that we can imagine in our society. It's been, to my mind, the worst thing that could be said about this government is the forces they have unleashed. And then to make matters worse, at least in 2 or 3 cases, because Kathua and Unnao were mentioned, they defend the perpetrators. I mean, that is inexcusable. No one says that the party or the country or the government are necessarily responsible for those incidents. But to defend the horrors that happened, that is inexcusable. And that's something else again that is being done in the name of religion and identity rather than in terms of the actual act that should be condemned.
Right. So I'm going to come back to you and get a sense of what your vision is, at least as we stand here more than a year ahead of election. So any questions, comments? Yes, please. I'm going to collect as many as possible at one shot and then bring them back. Yeah, go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Hariharan, and taking forward what has been spoken about, and I'm going to talk more about the social aspect rather than the economic, because social is something that is going to decide what happens. And I have a comment to make, which I will preface before I say this. I'm sorry, I might be prefacing it before the question, but whatever little we have seen. We talk about something happening as something new that's happening around. But if I were to look back at my times, and I'm 50 now, 54 now, and I'm talking about times in 1990s, the 1998s, I think the seeds of this were started then. And I have examples which I can narrate, but I wouldn't here. But I would surely like to say this, that we are today looking at what we are seeing today because the people have the ability or the freedom to express the bigotry that they had inherently hid within themselves. And that, to me, is one of the most difficult things, and it is not going to be something that's going to go away tomorrow, even if the Congress would come in to power. I say this for some people, and I'm going to put this as a question to you. The point that comes up is that if there was a government that gave governance and it gave economic development, in my opinion, we would still have supported the government that we see today. And I would ask the panelists here, what will Congress do to eradicate something that has been a long...
Got it. Okay. Can I get some quick other questions? Yes. Okay, go ahead. So, very short questions. Okay, not...
Hello.
Okay.
Yeah. Good evening, sir. I am Pramod Dongrai. I am from Pune chapter. My question is about the External Affairs Ministry. So, right now we see that all of our neighbors, which are there, like state of Bangladesh, state of like Sri Lanka, state of like Nepal, they are getting influenced by the Chinese. And it's a threat to us. So where do you see that the current government has gone wrong?
Okay. Next. Yeah, go ahead.
Should we take a few, Govind?
No, I think we'll collect a few and then this thing. Yeah.
Hello, hi. I'm Samir Falke. I work as a senior marketing manager in one of the leading banks in India. I have one question. I have observed last 10 years of UPA rule. And I know the policies that were brought, like RTI, Narega, that did a fundamental difference to this nation. But somewhere I still feel Congress lacks to communicate what it has done. It fails to communicate why reservation is required. Even in Karnataka, Ahinda policy, so for someone from the open category, I am not against that policy. Minorities have to be supported. But what's in for the open category? See, the image goes, they are doing for a certain segment. And that's the way I think the soft Hindutva strategy now. So basic question is, when will Congress learn to communicate the things that have been done?
Better. Okay, go ahead. Got it. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Mustan Dambawala.
Short question.
My question to you is, whereas what you have described about the state of India, particularly the social and economic distress, is very true. It's fact and it's not a fiction. Yet, for Congress to come and make a change and move on, how do you plan to remove the stigma of corruption which is sticking? Okay, and there has to be a plausible explanation of what steps you would take to make sure that it doesn't emerge again. Number one. Number two is the inefficiency on economic front or on governance. Most of us feel that Congress has done good work, but it is inadequate when you look at the 50 years of governance. So how are you going to really look at these two things which can convince people that it will make a difference? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, red t-shirt, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Dr. Varalakshmi. I head the media school here at Jai Hind College. My question is to Dr. Tharoor here regarding this Doklam concern, that we have had one episode and there seems to be another one brewing. The concern is that how much of it should be from the point of view of this whole jingoism that is coming through, because we have the military leadership also having an opinion on this, the defense minister having an opinion on this. So as someone who has had that space to look after, how do you see that to be tackled from an India-China perspective? Thank you.
Yes, red t-shirt. I'll just come back, 1 second.
My name is Ravi Kulkarni.
No, we're not. Yeah.
I had a question. I just want to know, I closely followed the AICC plenary, and I actually read all the resolutions therein as well. It seems like the Congress's line of thinking today is still very similar to pre-2014. My question is that, do you believe the Congress needs an acute shift in its policy position to regain the confidence of the people, akin to what Tony Blair did with New Labour?
Okay, so there are two questions which are external affairs. I'll come back. Let me. My panelists are getting, yeah. So the two questions on external affairs. So why don't you take them, and then I'll come to Milind on the communication.
So one was Doklam and the other one, just remind me.
Was in growing influence of China in the region.
Right. I'm sorry?
String of pearls.
It's a growing influence of China in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka.
Around us, yeah. Okay. So on the, maybe we should start with the general and then end up with the particular. On the general proposition, China has now become an economy that's 5 times our size. A generation ago, they were the same size as us. So that's the transformation that's happened. And when you've got that kind of size, you develop ambitions that are commensurate with your resource capability, your multiple trillion-dollar surplus investable, and of course your abilities to reach out farther and farther afield when you have that kind of resource. The Chinese are doing so. And what's more, cash is the currency of their influence. What they're able to offer any country, in any part of the world, not just in our own neighborhood, is rather generous development projects. Everything from building foreign ministries for small countries to developing ports, highways, railway lines, etc. And doing so with an efficiency and dispatch which India has not been notable for, let's be honest. And as a result, pretty much around the world, the Chinese have become significant players in a number of countries. It so happens that includes countries in our neighborhood, but I don't personally believe that they are singling out or targeting our neighborhood in order to choke us with a string of pearls, that theory that some American op-ed writers have been pulling around. I think that the Chinese have done the same in East Timor, Timor-Leste, or in West Africa without any, other power worried about being targeted by them. Now, the thing with the Chinese is, however, that with India, there is a certain geopolitical rivalry or tension. We have the world's longest unresolved frontier dispute, longest in both senses, of time as well as length. And that means that there is potentially an issue which could get inflamed at any time. And therefore, kind of Chinese positioning in our neighborhood is understandably looked at with more suspicion, more anxiety than it would otherwise perhaps have been. At the same time, we have to recognize that there is also a clear distinction in terms of our own capacities. We were offered the port in Hambantota first. And after the file was kicked around a few ministries and everyone was reluctant to take on this burden, the Sri Lankans gave up, Rajapaksa gave up and went to the Chinese, who said yes with alacrity and did the port in record time. So it's not that the Sri Lankans and the Chinese were getting in bed in order to confine us. It's that we couldn't get our act together to fix what the Sri Lankan president of the day, because Hambantota is in his area, his constituency, wanted fixed. We couldn't do it, the Chinese could. So we have to look on a case-by-case basis. In recent years, certainly the extent of Chinese influence in the Maldives ought to worry us. That really, the Arabian Sea in that entire area was really an Indian lake. And we are losing the dominant influence we have always enjoyed, always, literally enjoyed there. And that is worrying, and that suggests a certain amount of ineptitude on the part of the government. But in other countries, I think we can hold our own. I think certainly in Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and indeed Sri Lanka too, we have the wherewithal to offer something that China can't to those countries, whether it's cultural, whether it's historic, whether it's levels of degrees of comfort in dealing with us, etc. That will always counterbalance what China does. I'm not unduly worried about it. Yes, China's influence is growing. They have a lot of money to throw around, and if money is being thrown, why shouldn't other countries want to accept it? Now, coming to Doklam, that's, to my mind, a more troubling problem. We don't claim that part, that Doklam Plateau. We say it is Bhutan. The Chinese claim it and say it is China. And the Bhutanese are not spoiling for a fight. Now, it's largely uninhabited terrain. But when the Chinese started building a road, the reason the alarm bells went off in India is because from a Chinese point of view, it's a road to nowhere. Even if that territory was theirs, there's nothing at the end of that road in China, and there are no Chinese people or anybody else living there. What there is, however, is the Jamperi Ridge, which is a ridge overlooking that narrow strip of land, the Chicken's Neck, that links West Bengal to the northeast, which would be a territory that in the event of a future war, the Chinese army would find it that much easier to roll troops into that. India did react quickly because we have observation posts on the border that is in Sikkim side, overlooking that portion of Bhutan. We saw the bulldozers arriving and the platoon or whatever accompanying it that was beginning to build the road, and our soldiers rapidly came down and stopped because we have an assistance treaty with Bhutan that enables us to do that. That was the standoff for 72 days. That was finally resolved with officially India claiming a big diplomatic triumph. We withdrew first and the Chinese withdrew a few days later. Except we withdrew all the way back to Sikkim and the Chinese withdrew 200 meters. And then they completely reinforced their camp. They have built various prefab huts, they have built helipads, and they've increased their troop presence to well over 1,000 soldiers from where they had only a few dozen. Now this gives them a capacity, if they want to do it confrontationally, to try and build the road again, and it could be potentially an escalation. But they've been far cleverer than us. What they've done is from that base, so if you can imagine, if this is Doklam Plateau, Sikkim is here, China is up here, they were building a road down here. And obviously our chaps saw it and came down. Now what they've started doing is they are building a road like this. It'll end up in the same place they wanted to go. It'll be a longer and more troublesome thing for them to build, but it'll be out of sight of the Indians. Certainly not easy for the Indians to suddenly come in and intervene. And they can build their road and have that particular edge over us that they were seeking to build this way. That is the problem with Doklam. So the Congress party is severely critical of the government on Doklam. It is justified. First of all, it has mismanaged its contacts with China to have allowed such a thing to happen. It could have used diplomacy to prevent the Chinese seeking this unnecessary bit of military advantage, which is only useful to them in the event of war and has no other use otherwise. And we could have also prevented this unnecessary grandiose claim of diplomatic triumph, which is unfortunately, this government is far better at marketing and PR than at actually doing anything. I mean, I've been very frustrated about the fact that, for example, the raid into Myanmar, which in their second year of their term, they boasted with great triumph. We have conducted a dozen such raids and never said a word. Because it insults the self-respect of the Myanmarese, who can't control that bit of territory, but they're willing to turn a blind eye to India going in and going after Indian rebels in Myanmar. When the BJP did it and talked about it, the Myanmarese got absolutely offended and said, you're not welcome in our territory again. If you come back in, we're going to shoot. Similarly, the so-called surgical strikes. There have been pinpoint raids like this in the past. We never called them surgical strikes. We didn't issue press releases. But this whole business of that it doesn't almost matter what you do as long as you get political credit for it. That is the slogan that underpins all the BJP's posturing. It doesn't work so well in foreign policy as they think it does in domestic policy.
Okay.
And I think it could hurt us.
Milind, so let me ask you to fuse a couple of questions. So it's a little broad, but one is to do with communication in general. Are you communicating what you believe and your vision clearly? There are people here who evidently believe you're not. Secondly, the feeling that even after the plenary, there's no clear policy shift. There's no new Congress or new Labour that's being presented to the people who are clearly looking for something different. And to some extent, it's the older question about what could have been done in the last 50 years. If you've not done it, then would you be able to do it now?
Oops. Well, it's a tough question, but that's. I think to continue what Shashi said, compared to this government and this political and to the BJP, we certainly don't have the PR machinery internally in the Congress party that they do. Neither do we function and do we work based on what's going to get us good PR.
You're being assessed in contrast or in?
No, I mean when somebody spoke about corruption, somebody spoke about communication. I think they're both interrelated because we.
No, you feel they're measuring it against the BJP.
No, I'm saying that when we were in power, and for instance, when the 2G scam broke out, we actually did fail to communicate as a government as to what really happened. And we allowed, a ridiculous notional loss of 1,76,000 crores to be bandied about by the opposition then, by the government now, which we failed to communicate to the people that the decision was taken to increase tele-density. I was a minister, not at the time, but soon after the decision was taken. And in fact, the decision not to auction spectrum was done to encourage tele-density in rural areas. And we failed to communicate that, look, if you auction spectrum, the government is getting money in one pocket, but essentially the telco is borrowing money from the bank, so the government is paying from another pocket. So it doesn't mean
people are paying higher rates.
And people are paying higher rates.
Cheaper call rates to spectrum.
Right, which of course affects tele-density. And a decade later, you had the special court acquitting those and saying that essentially there was no scam. So 2G scam was actually a great case study of poor communication, and I accept that we as a party and we as a government failed to communicate. So going forward, and to answer my young friend's question about the plenary, I don't want to get into this new Labour or those as we spoke about earlier. These are just Western sort of ways of communicating, and I think India has its own unique indigenous form of political and electoral communication. But going forward, we as a party know clearly what we stand for. I think the people at large know what we stand for socially vis-a-vis the BJP. In the coming days and coming weeks and coming months, you will see our narrative, especially with regards to our economic narrative, become more and more lucid, much more clearer. And I think you will be able to compare as a voter what is Congress's strategy going forward with regards to the economy, what has been its strategy in the past, and as compared to what the BJP and the NDA's strategy has been. So I'm very confident that we've been correcting the mistakes of the past. We have radically transformed and upgraded our institutional capacity as a party to communicate more effectively. I mean, we were pretty much absent on social media. When Shashi actually shares something in common with the Prime Minister, Narendra Modi and Shashi Tharoor were the first to embrace Twitter. And I was one of the few politicians to join Twitter afterwards as well. And internally, when Shashi and I would tell our party that we should join these platforms, we were a little averse. We were a little careful whether we should use social media, how effectively should we use it, will it be considered to be an elitist medium. And we've caught up. We're doing it very well today on social media. I think we have spokespersons like Sanjay and others who are doing a fantastic job in representing the party's view on mainstream media, on television channels. And I believe that the narrative is starting to change. I think people are beginning to see that BJP stands more for PR than action. Shashi's point is a great example that surgical strikes and these kinds of things are not things you talk about. These are things that the fact that they're called a surgical strike essentially means it's a covert operation. You don't make a covert operation overt. And that's what this government has been doing. And people are beginning to see that, Govind. For us, it's very clear that we have to build institutional capacity, we have to communicate far more effectively, and we have to get our narrative in place. And all of that is something that you're going to see by July and August, where it will become very, very clear to voters.
Oh, just one point for the gentleman in the red t-shirt. 1991, the Congress Party